Thank you, Lady. So good afternoon, everyone. Wait, Lady. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Dia. I'm from Indonesia and I'm part of external affairs of IC68 and sub table C for table 4. I will introduce our table C Prial Tale from India, and my mate sub table C are Angelica Roldan from Philippines and Mai Ochai from Japan. Our table members are Lady from Philippines, Dival and Purva from India, Tinsi from South Africa, and Ibrahim from Mauritania. Due to some health and other reasons, our table chief, Friel, and other two members, Purva and Ibrahim, will not join us, but instead, Ibrahim will give presentation by video. So table 4, with the topic on social work practice, with elderly discussed the various issues faced by the elderly in Japan. After analyzing the issues of population aging and interlinking with different perspectives, they were able to narrow down the topic to elderly health. The table discussion and research aims towards a saving development of more responsive services and policies to make our society inclusive of the elderly. In order to focus on the various aspects of elderly health, our group was divided into 3 subgroups, as Lan said before, and along with this, we also came up with an application prototype for the elderly. So this table, through the policy proposal, is determined to ensure the inclusion of every single individual. And we hope you enjoy this presentation. And Lady, move to you.
One of the subtopics that we had was the isolation and the health of the elderly. So issues related to healthcare are frequently discussed, especially with regards to the elderly. This is because the elderly are said to be more vulnerable to sicknesses. This includes both physical and mental health. Physical health affects mental health and vice versa, and so both of these needs to be addressed. Social isolation is not an uncommon phenomenon, and it may affect health directly or indirectly. And this is particularly significant in old age because of reduced social networks, decreasing economic resources, and changes in family structures. However, not all the elderly are isolated just because they live alone. We have seen cases where elderly commit crimes in Japan because they are lonely, despite some of them still having a family and still living with their families. Steps should be then taken for the elderly to feel that they are still connected and are part of the society or the community. Starting simple, such as social groups, is good, but so is doing something that requires more time and effort, like a smartphone application. Moving on to the next subgroup on socio-economic concerns, here's Divyal.
Thank you, Lady. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever they are. And I'm going to present on the social economic status and the elderly. So starting with, there is a vast disparity in terms of pension remunerations. If we see in terms of males and females in Japan, so where males are receiving the pension of around $3,800, whereas females are at the same time receiving the pension of around $2,400. These statistics was taken from the survey in the year 2017. So what is the factor that is leading to it? So the Japanese pension system has not been modified since 1980. Since the society has come forwards in leaps and bounds, there are various problems that are emerging through it, such as the non-recognition of single women, elderly women in the society, as the Japanese pension system recognized the institutions of marriage. Now, that leads to the third problem, which is in response, when there is no provision of pension schemes, it can lead to a debt trap for single elderly women. And moving to the next slide, which will be presented by my friend Ibrahim.
Good morning. My name is Ibrahim from Mauritania. So I'm going to talk about socioeconomic status of the elderly. So when we talk about socioeconomic in case of the elderly, especially in Japan, so we have to talk about poverty in general amongst the elderly. So, this phenomenon is apparent in elderly over 75 years. Also of note is the number of people over 80 years. The number had increased from 4% to 8% since 2000 and is likely to double by 2050, which means we have to do something because we're still in 2022. To about, by 2050, to about 16.5%. The poverty rate is something to watch out for, especially for the elderly women population at the pension schemes look equal, but it is not which could be explained through the pension remuneration that the men and women are entitled to receive during the retreatment. For men is around $3,800. For women, it is around $2,500. So by here we can see the inequality of gender. In this case of the elderly, women and men, they are not equal. So there is a pretty high chance for women to be falling below the poverty line who do not adhere to the earlier norms of society. The elderly in Japan accounts for 29.1% of the population, and this number is accounting for all those 65 and over, making that about 36.4 million people. So, as medicine and technology improve, people will generally live longer than they did before. Bearing in mind the figure, we can estimate that from the retirement age of 65 till the age that you pass on. Here we can talk also about the transport, because the transport all with the reduced income. This is best true as some older persons, they opted to move to rural areas in hopes of carrying the living cost, as it would cost a lot to stay in their current places. So the social economic issues is really here, especially in Japan, and we have to deal with it before 2050. Brothers and sisters, thank you very much, and you can read our research proposal. Maybe it will be very easy for you to get more information, and thank you very much.
Okay, I will be doing the following part. Hello, my name is Boskona Dinsolo Kumalo, and then I'll be doing the socio-economics and the elderly. When we look at socioeconomics, what we're looking at is the financial implications and how they interfere with the person's daily life and society at large. A study done in Japan on pension estimates that 25% of the elderly women will be living below the poverty line in the near future. And this number can increase to 50% for unmarried and divorced women. According to the figures from an official population census in 2010, the percentage of never married and divorced women among the elderly women in the increase from 15.4% and 11.9% in 2015 to increase to about 17.6 and 12.7% in 2050. This being said, we can see that the finances are the leading factor that cause poverty and also the societal issues that are faced by the elderly. Next slide. Okay, the findings. A study showed that elderly people that struggle with poverty opted to rather Can you hear me well?
Distant.
Self-deprivation, opted rather for self-deprivation. This meant that they decided that they would rather cut down on necessities, things like refrigerators, air conditioning, transport, and medicine, or going to the hospital, and would rather isolate themselves because they do not to burden their families, or they do not have families that they can have support from, or any other care system that they can reach out to. Okay. The older adults are the elderly that are all facing these problems, and it is our job as society to ensure that they have a way to be included and they are not left behind. Because if we leave them behind, then it doesn't mean that society is functioning well. Thank you.
Okay, so for the findings, we also divided this into two. So on the two are on the isolation and on socioeconomic problems. So for the isolation and the health of the elderly, isolation or being disconnected from the rest of society can affect health, maybe not entirely directly, but it does have an impact. An example of this is shown in a certain documentary of an old man who died because of malnutrition. Interestingly, this could have been prevented, or his death could have been prevented, if he had decided to get out of isolation and to actually visit a hospital, as the social workers had told him. Still, this is under-researched and underexplored. It is indeed important to fill in the gaps of the previous studies about isolation and loneliness and health. Interventions in the form of social activities or applications they can use are a must in cases like this. In the end, what should be addressed are the problems that cause people to feel lonely or isolated. It is also important to address the in-between problems which lead isolated elderly to suffer from poor health and for sickly elderly to endure isolation. Next, for the findings on socioeconomic status and the elderly, Devyal.
Thank you, Lady. Now coming to the moving forward in that section to the next section of the socio-economic status. The findings are that the elderly population has to face huge stress. It's if we see in terms of Japan, in terms of rest of the country, the Japanese system is doing good in this sense because they have some kind of social insurance schemes for the elderly. But if we see in moving towards a much bigger picture to the underdeveloped countries and the third world countries, there is a problem that a lot of countries such as India, people the percentage of this old age homes are increasing, as well as the elderly have a lot of stress in this concern that after their retirement age, after they have given all their life to the children, they have to shift to a home where they'll be dealing with by a third person, not their children. Secondly, now coming back to Japan, if we see from different threats, the culmination, the retirement age comes from a range from 65 to 70 years. And Japan being one of the developed countries where people, the huge population reach to the age of 100, there are still 20 years left after their retirement where elderly people can contribute toward the economy, Japanese economy. So the Japanese government can come up with such initiatives to help us integrate the elderly. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, didn't see. Yeah, you can go.
Okay. As I have previously mentioned, elders are choosing self-deprivation in order to be able to afford their basic necessities. This means that they are compromising their health, and this leads to weakened immune systems and also death. As Lady had mentioned before, that they would rather isolate than go out to ask for help. The elderly people have no support, especially because they don't wish to burden anybody and would rather live life alone and socially isolate themselves. Our solution to this would be, as we've previously mentioned, an app so that we open a a scenario for them where they can willingly ask for help and know that they're not burdening anybody, but they have people that are there, are willing to help them and are ready to help them. Next slide, please. The elderly have to live at the standard that they used to live when we're looking at retirement, because now that they have retired, they have to basically continue living. It's not just the end. Now, the problem that they face when this happens is that they have to live on less at the same level. So they have to live in the same place, afford the same things, or even afford more in the case of deteriorating health. And they're doing all of this with less money, and also they are sometimes physically unfit and are not longer able to get a job, or they are at an age where finding employment is very difficult, but they need the money because Japan has a very high standard of living and is one of the most expensive countries to live in. Thank you.
Okay, so for the next part, we'll be explaining our methodology as well as the application that we have conceptualized. So for the methodology of how we came up with this app, we use content analysis approach. So we read a lot, and then based on everything that we gathered, an application was conceptualized out of all those things. So introducing our application, it's called the EdCare. So EdCare will feature different services that will help the elderly. So later on, I would be showing a video showcasing these features. So the app contains various features to keep everything in one place so that there is no hassle for the elderly. This aims to make day-to-day necessary tasks easier. The goal is that it should be available in many languages, but for the prototype, we just used English. However, there are still some limitations, such as it may not cover for those with technological illiteracy and people who do not have smartphones. This means the target audience are or the target population are people currently in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, or the future elderly, because they know how to operate a smartphone. So when they grow older, they will know how to use the application. But still, there is a need for the government to make technological literacy more accessible so that even the older people can use this app. Likewise, there are still limited functionalities in our prototype, as please take note that it's just a prototype and it requires user authentication. The prototype is made by one of our group members, Purva, but unfortunately she cannot join us today. Instead, I will be showing you the presentation for the prototype. So here's the video. Okay, so as mentioned, we want the elderly to feel like they are still part of the society. And this app is just one step to do that. And also, it's an app that does not require a lot of money from them. So regardless of their socioeconomic status, they may be able to use it. So to conclude, we have Mai.
Yeah, thank you, Rudy. To conclude this proposal, we have already established that the elderly are facing a lot of problems in the present society, especially in Japan. As early as today, there is a need to prepare for the aging people's future. Our application EdCare is another unexplored possible solution to make the lives of the elderly population more convenient and at the same time inclusive. Then, as a recommendation, we believe that the application feature needs to be more explored, especially by app developers. There is a need for it to be more interactive and easier or smoother to use in order to make sure that the elderly will be able to use it for a long time or without having a difficulty. So extensive research on isolation, socioeconomic, and the health of the elderly will also give a way to the possibility of incorporating solution to different problem on the application. Yeah, thank you for your listening and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Table 4, for your presentation.